Dear Alan, first of all, it's a great honor to have you here in Ukraine and a great pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much that you've decided to share your insights about your decision-making process here for Prometheus participants. You claim that our limited attention is the constraint, our bottleneck, in achieving the goals important to us. Can you explain why and share your views? Why is it important in understanding how to improve our decision-making?
Sure. You know, I've always been curious about why good people make and often repeat bad decisions, and why some people are able to achieve incredible goals in their lifetime. And it poses the question, so what is it that really limits us from achieving more of the goals that are important to us? And when you ask people, you know, what is it that limits them, they would say, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough wisdom or information. But it turns out that the real constraint, our bottleneck, is really our limited attention. And a simple test people can do to just validate this, which is, if you think about all the things that demand your attention on a daily basis, both at work or at university or at school, if you're still at university or school, and you compare the things that demand your attention versus your available attention, there will always be this shortage. There are more things that are demanding our attention, more people that are demanding our attention than what we have available attention. So as a result, it will not just be a temporary bottleneck, but it's a permanent bottleneck. So how we invest that attention, what we pay attention to, and who we pay attention to, really is the thing that will determine how successful we become in life. If we pay attention to the wrong things or the wrong people, we won't be successful. If we pay attention to the right things and the right people, we can become incredibly successful. And that's really what I've seen as the major difference between the most successful people in life, regardless of which field you take or how you measure success, compared to the rest, is they are extremely careful and learn very fast about whether the things that they are currently paying attention to and the people that they are currently paying attention to, is it helping them or not helping them, or maybe even harming them in achieving more of these goals that are important to them.
How do we usually take decisions, and what are the common mistakes we make?
A very interesting question. So if you think about the most important decision, if our constraint is our limited attention, is how to allocate this scarce resource, right? This is the fundamental question whenever you have a bottleneck, is how do I decide what to allocate it to? So the most important decision is, who do we pay attention to and what do we pay attention to? And there are fundamental mistakes that we make. We pay attention to many things that is a distraction, that's not really helping us, right? And if we were very strict on that and saying, by paying attention to this thing or this person, is it really helping me achieve more of the goals that are important to me? Or is it just a distraction? So the idea of how do I decide what to pay attention to and who to pay attention to is really a core part of the research that we do, both for decision makers within government or organization, or even for us in our personal life, is what do we pay attention to, how do we decide, and what the common mistakes we make is really fundamental to how successful we'll become one day.
I see. Is it a tool for every hour movement or decision we make? Each time we have to answer this question? I wonder.
Of course not. If you think about how many decisions we make on a daily basis, there are incredible large amount of decisions that we make. We should pay attention to the ones that are consequential, that can really make a big impact. The challenge that we face is that by far the majority of the decisions that we make are made by our System 1. Daniel Kahneman, the famous Nobel Prize winner of economics, gave us this beautifully simple but very important classification. He said that when we are thinking about what to do, how to do it, etc., we really use two systems for making decisions, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is our fast and automatic mode of thinking. It's kind of intuition, simple heuristics that we use. The majority of our decisions are actually made using System 1, using our intuition. We have another system, which is System 2, which is the more slow and deliberate. And that's the one that we use when we say that I need to think about something. That's kind of this cognition. So we have intuition and cognition. And the most obvious type of mistakes that we make is when we use System 1 when we should have used System 2. So we have reacted, and we could have really benefited from slowing down our thinking a little bit. The other mistake, of course, that we make is we overthink things when we would have benefited from just going with our gut feel, using our intuition. So the methods that I've been working on is specifically related to the first type of mistakes, is how do I know when to take a decision and just to slow down our thinking a little bit so that we don't automatically react based on these very strong emotions that we often have, exaggerated fears or frustrations that can cause us to do things that we shouldn't be doing, overreact and make changes that are bad for us, or on the other side, cause us to get stuck, cause us to procrastinate because of the fear, and as a result we don't do the things that we probably know we should be doing.
And can you just provide your explanation, what is intuition? Because many businessmen are actually proud that they make decisions by intuition, and actually yesterday after your workshop, our client told us that I'm not agreeing with Alan about the intuition because he's saying that you can use the intuition only after, for example, 10,000 hours of investing into this field and etc. But when we've been doing our business solutions and decisions at early 90s, we've been doing everything by intuition.
Right.
So what will you tell?
Sure. So what I explained in the program that we teach is that we have these two systems, right? System 1, fast and automatic. We can kind of classify it as using intuition. A simple way to think about it is a simple if-then rule. Mm-hmm. So our most intuitive, instinctive reaction is fight or flight, right? Every single organism have this little intuition built into it to say something like this: if it's bigger than you, flee. If it's smaller than you and maybe look tasty, try to eat it, right? And of course we are learning all the time. So our intuition is developing all the time as we are testing. We're doing kind of small experiments. So the last time I tried to eat something that was smaller than me, but I almost died, I tried to remember, okay, the ones that have little red dots on them, don't try to eat them. So now I'm evolving my intuition, right? Okay. If it's bigger than me, run, flee. If it's smaller than me and it doesn't have those small little dots, then try to eat it. So what we were talking about yesterday is that, generally speaking, following your intuition is a good idea, unless the most obvious one is you haven't yet developed your intuition. So of course we are born with intuition. I can read your body language without anybody having trained me, right? I'd see you for the first time. I've never met you before, and I can immediately say, Julia, are you okay? Because you don't look okay, right? Nobody has trained me to do it. It's completely intuitive. So that I got with the package of being a human being. As thousands and thousands of generations before me has developed over time this incredible ability to judge whether you are looking and feeling okay or not. But when we are dealing with really complex fields, and many of the organizations that we are trying to manage today are incredibly complex. They have this kind of acronym that we use called VUCA, which is VUCCA, right? There's lots of volatility, there's uncertainty, we face complexity, constraints, and ambiguity. In those type of environments, it takes us a long time to build up intuition. And when we haven't yet built up the intuition, we really shouldn't be trusting our intuition. We should trust an expert. We should ask somebody that's already invested the time it takes. And there's this general rule, which is what I shared, that it takes about 10,000 hours, the equivalent of 5 to 10 years of doing something repeatedly over, for us to be able to identify the patterns and recognize them and then have this gut instinct of just using an if-then. If this happens, then that's what I should do. So that was my advice, is be very careful that when you are stepping into a new environment, be very careful to trust your intuition. At least have a backup plan of somebody that you can ask, right, that has already developed that intuition. So the other two reasons why we shouldn't use our intuition is this. The second reason is we often use intuition and we don't realize to what extent our intuition is influenced mainly by the short-term impact of our decision or the local impact. So we automatically assume that if it's good for my part, it's good for the system. And often that's not the case. Or if it's good for the short term, it's good for the long term, and that's often not the case. So when you suspect that there could be a major difference, using your intuition that was developed mainly based on judging the local or short-term impact is also not a good idea. And that's where advanced technologies like simulation, etc. helps. The first one that we talked about is where we shouldn't be using our intuition is when we don't realize to what extent the intuition is heavily influenced by strong emotions. Emotions such as exaggerated fears of loss and risk that can cause us not to make good changes. Even though we know rationally that it's the right thing to do, we procrastinate because we fear losing something or gaining something that we don't want. Or on the other side, the very strong emotions of exaggerated frustrations with the current situation or an exaggerated expectation of the future situation, and that can cause us to overreact. So it's really coming down to just understanding when should we trust our intuition and when maybe, rather than just going with our gut feel, maybe slow down our thinking a little bit, or at least ask an expert to check whether our intuition is a good idea or not.
Great, thank you. Like most people, when I face a difficult decision, I use the ProCon list to evaluate whether I should make a change or not.
Yeah.
Why is using the ProCon list is not enough?
A very good question. So first of all, the background to this is the ProCon list was first formally documented by Benjamin Franklin in the 1700s. Now, decision sciences has kind of moved on a little bit, over the last 250 odd years. So that's already a justification to see, but what do we know today about decision making that makes using the pro-con list as the main way of judging whether a decision is good or bad by weighing up the pros or the positives, the arguments for versus the arguments against the change? So how does the pro-con list help? First of all, we struggle with ambivalence when we see both the positives and negatives in something or someone. So it's always useful to write them down. And one of the most obvious benefits of writing it down is that it can expose confirmation bias. So if we have a very long list of positives, pros, and one or two negatives, and we still haven't decided, it should raise some red flags. That if there wasn't more negatives, we probably would have done it already. So it kind of exposes this bias that we have towards either making a change or not making a change. The problem comes in two things, is what if I have both pros and cons on my list? How do I now decide? Herbert Simon, the father of decision making in terms of bounded rationality, was the first one to recognize that we don't make decisions using the old economic model where we have some utility and we compare the pros with the cons. And we do the kind of mental arithmetic that Benjamin Franklin talked about. We say, oh, the pros outweigh the cons and therefore I'll make the decision. Or the cons outweigh the pros, I shouldn't do it. And the reason is that in most cases there is no common utility to compare. So imagine I'm looking at whether to take a new job. The positive of the job is that I will get higher salary. Okay. The negative of the job is I will have to move my family away from where they have support structures. Our parents live close by, the school is close by, and it will be a long drive for me to work. How do I now compare these two? Can I use money, for example, to compare them? No, I can't. So from that point, it has major limitations in that even if I use it correctly and I get all the pros and cons listed, I don't have a practical way of comparing it. What we've been evaluating as an alternative way is to not just look at the pros and cons of making the change, but also to look at the pros and cons of not making the change. And rather trying to weigh them up against each other is to treat these pros and cons as our assumptions of what are the positives and negatives of the change. And as soon as we verbalize them as assumptions, it means that we can challenge them. So rather than trying to weigh them up against each other, why can't we challenge them to say, is that really a positive? Is this positive really unique to the change? Or is there some other way of achieving it?
Amazing. In your research, you show that in fact there are 5 common decision mistakes we make. Can you share this and how you, new ProConCloud method, help us to prevent them?
Sure. So what we've done in terms of the method is we've taken the ProCon list as a foundation and added to that also decision support tools that have been developed by Dr. Ellie Goldratt, who was the creator of Theory of Constraints, the evaporating cloud technique, and the change matrix cloud. And we've put all of those methods together and created this new method called the ProConCloud. So it's literally thinking about some problem that's hanging over your head like a dark cloud. And the reason why it's a dark cloud is because of the ambivalence. I see both the pros and cons of making the change, and I see the pros and cons of not making the change. But that method by itself is not sufficient to ensure that we make better, faster decisions. And the reason for that, as you mentioned, is there's actually 5 common mistakes that we make. The first one is we pay attention to the wrong problems. We get distracted with unimportant problems, or we procrastinate on important ones. So step 1 has been designed to validate whether the problem that I'm dealing with or the opportunity that I have to decide on, is it really important to me and to the stakeholders or to the organization I'm part of? So that's step 1. Step 2 is trying to address the common mistake of saying that even if I have an important problem, I often jump to a solution, ignoring the fact that there's the status quo that is in competition with that solution or change, or that there might be in fact other changes that could have given me a better option. The other mistake that we make from going from a problem is we jump to finding somebody to blame. So the second step has been designed to say, once I've got an important problem, what is the conflict I face in dealing with a problem, the change versus not change or another change, and who do I blame for causing the problem? Maybe I blame myself, or maybe I blame somebody else, but it's still worthwhile to put myself in their shoes and understand their conflict. So if I take a simple example and I say, I've got a company at the moment, and there's a lot of finished goods in our warehouse. In fact, it's become so bad that it's almost impossible to find things. The whole warehouse is full, and I'm in sales. So what is the conflict I face if I'm asked to solve this problem? I might face the conflict of reducing the discounts or increasing discounts in order to sell this excess inventory. And the benefit of that, of course, will be that I can get rid of the excess inventory, but it also carries with it a negative, which is it reduces my margin. Who do I blame for causing the problem? I might be blaming production that keeps on producing stuff even if there's no demand. So what I do in that step is I say, so what do you want them to do? And that becomes the conflict. On the one side, what caused the problem, on the other side, what did you want them to do? And again, from their perspective, think about the positives and the negatives. So that's all about step 2. Step 3 is dealing with a common mistake that we make, that when I'm facing a decision conflict, I have to decide what to do. We think that the only viable solution is to compromise, for both sides to give up something. And this is kind of based on this philosophy almost that for me to win, you have to lose. For both of us to succeed, we both have to give up something. But we know from psychology that people hate giving up stuff. So step 3 is all about exploring 4 different options that don't involve giving up something, but adding something to what the alternatives are that we have. Either to change, plus adding something so we can not have to give away the positives of not changing or gain the negatives of changing. Not change plus plus, when not to change, or maybe another change. These are 4 viable options. The 4th mistake that we make is that we often ignore our own intuition or other people's intuition about yes buts, reservations, that says, I've come up with a great idea, I think it'll be wonderful. And of course their first reaction is yes, but. And the but is really the reservation. I don't think it's efficient, I think it has some negatives or some implementation obstacles. So rather than criticize that as being negative, I should use that input, that human intuition, to strengthen my solution, to take it from a half-baked idea to a fully baked idea. And that's what step 4 is about. And step 5 is just about recognizing that the last mistake we make is we suck at doing good experiments. We go on a new diet and we don't follow the diet exactly. So we will never know if we didn't lose the weight. Was it because the diet didn't work, or was it because I simply didn't follow the steps in a diet? So step 5 is all about how to do good experiments. So we know whether something helped, didn't help, or harmed us.
I faced many times when people just do not do anything because they think it's not gonna work. So they don't even try. So it's truly very strange and challenging probably when people just do not do something because they do think that it's not going to work. But how do you know? You didn't try even.
Yes, and of course the main reason there is fear, right? Is fear of what if it doesn't work? Will I be blamed for it by somebody else, or will I blame myself? So the way to ensure that they can try it at least is to help them design an experiment, a small experiment that shows that the downside if it failed is very small. The upside if it succeeds should be very big. We call this safe to fail type of experiments. So and I think you're absolutely right, that's an absolute critical part in the decision-making process is how do I design experiments that's safe to fail? That if it works, there will be a big benefit. If it doesn't work, it'll be fast to know, to check if it didn't work, and the downside should be small.
And I just would like to share that for me, one of your insights was that truly when you compromise, you have to give up something. But you're saying that all your methods you are providing in your ProConCloud method allow us to add actually something, because I was not so clear about understanding why compromise is not so good.
Yes.
Because we've been taught in a culture of be able to compromise, to find a compromise, then you will be very successful, and etc. But compromise is about giving up all the
Yes.
time. So thank you for this clear understanding for myself, and I can then explain to anybody as well why compromise.
Yes, and the challenges that we have in the way that we think, because we have this heuristic of always trying to protect ourselves, right, is we weigh losses far greater than what we weigh the equivalent gains. And as a result, we don't make a fair comparison between what I gain and what I lose. We always will weigh the losses much greater than the gains. And that creates the status quo bias. It just tells us that it's almost always safer not to take the risk because we weigh the losses much greater than the risks. So that has to be built into a decision-making process, is that as soon as I ask you to give up something, I should suspect that you will not think rationally about it. You will weigh the losses much greater. It's the idea of, if you imagine a union demanding an increase in salary, and rather than a management team saying to them, I want you to reduce your demands, is to say, I will give you your demands as long as you are willing to add something to ensure that we remain profitable or that we achieve our profitability. So getting the union to think about what can I add to my demand to also meet the needs of the shareholders, rather than what must I give up to meet their needs.
I'm pretty excited about the option of your method to learn from experience. So you claim that ProConCloud method can be applied to our past decisions we made, and we now know that they've been wrong. So how can we use it?
Yes, so I mentioned just briefly that we make 5 decision mistakes. So the method has been designed to help us prevent those, or at least to reduce that. And that's when we face new decisions. We want to make better, faster decisions. But we can also use the same method to go back in time and to analyze a decision mistake that either we have made or somebody else that we blamed have made, to try and understand what was the assumptions that caused them to make that decision mistake, and to challenge those assumptions and ask ourselves what would be better assumptions in the future. One of the areas that I've looked at a lot is when you look at assumptions, it's not that useful to think of an assumption as right or wrong. It's much more useful to think of assumptions as helpful or harmful. Believing I can do something is quite helpful because, as you mentioned, at least I will try. Yes. Believing I can't do something is not that helpful. It can be harmful because it means I won't even try. So the objective of this ProConCloud method is purely to expose these self-limiting assumptions or beliefs that can cause us to make and often repeat bad decisions. So I can either do that with a new decision, or, as you mentioned, I can go back and try to learn from experience. Of course, the challenge in learning from experience is the lag that we have between cause and effect. As if you think about, touching a hot stove plate, you don't need to touch it twice to learn and form this intuition that don't touch hot stove plates, right? But can you imagine if it burned you a week later? How would you put these two things together, right? And that's what makes it so hard for us to learn from experience, because many of our actions have delays before we see the impact. So it's great to have a tool to be able to go back once I've realized I didn't get the outcome that I wanted, to trace my step backs and see where in the process did I make a bad assumption and what would have been a better assumption, and better in the way of just, it could have helped me to prevent this mistake.
And I wonder if we would like to make such a culture in a company to learn from our experience, from our mistakes. What, let's say, decisions we should put through the process? What decisions, first of all, we have to make on a systematic-based analysis?
Of course, I think the most obvious one is consequential decisions, right? Decisions that will have a major financial impact or major impact on any stakeholder, we really should be capturing. But we shouldn't just be capturing decisions that we've made to do something. Mm-hmm. We should also be capturing decisions that we've made not to do something. It's the difference between, doing the wrong thing and not doing the right thing, right? Doing the wrong thing has consequences that are then appearing in the financial statements.
Yes.
Those ones are easy to learn from. What's not easy to learn from is errors of omission, not doing the right thing, not capitalizing on that opportunity because of the fear. So our recommendation is that every decision that is consequential should be captured, and we should be clearly stating what was the assumptions on which this decision was made, whether it was to do something or not to do something, so that we can go back to learn from the experience.
Amazing. Can you share some applications of where your method is being used today?
Yes, so there's a number of areas that we have seen that people benefit from it. So firstly, we've been testing it over the last 15 or so years in 3 areas. Private sector, managing companies, public sector, managing not-for-profit organizations or governmental organizations or non-governmental organizations, and then of course in decision-making within our personal life. Nutritional choices, what we eat, what we do, how much we spend, etc. So we've covered a very broad base of those to make sure that the method will work in all of those cases. But how people are practically applying it is within organizations, as they are training people to use this process to, first of all, to judge when is the decision important or not important, and if it is important, that there's benefit to slow down your thinking. The process, once you've used it a few times, only take an hour or two to go through the whole process, and we normally have that time to take it through. But we've also seen it being used in schools now, to be able to give kids the ability, say I'm being bullied at school, is to try and understand, okay, so this dark cloud that's hanging over me is I'm being bullied. Why is that important to me and the people that I care about? What is the conflict it puts me into? Tell the teacher, don't tell the teacher. What's the pros and cons of each of those? And then to put myself in the shoes of the bully, the one I blame, of trying to understand, so he bullies me, what do I want him to do is to stop? What's the pros and cons of each of those to get a better understanding of that? We are also using it to understand what's the fundamental reasons why people keep eating the wrong things. Is it really because of ignorance? You know, we didn't know that sugar is bad for us. Of course, maybe 20, 30 years ago, that could have been the case. But today, there's overwhelming evidence. And that's often the case, is that we love treating problems as if it's caused by ignorance. Right? People smoke, we educate them. They still smoke, we print these terrible labels on the cigarette packets, right? As if they don't know how bad it is for them. A very simple test could have proven that people smoke not because of ignorance, and that in most countries, the highest percentage professionals that smoke are doctors. The ones that really know how bad it is for them, right? So it can't be ignorance. Why is it? It must be because of either inertia, there's some fear that if I stopped, I would have to give up something. Maybe the ability to cope with stress, or the fear of gaining something. Maybe I don't want to gain weight that I think will happen unavoidably if I stop smoking. Or on the other side, ineptitude, which is kind of, I have the knowledge, I apply it, but I compromise. So I think just doing a little bit less of it will be enough. And often that's not the case. So I think that's the key thing, is to try and apply it more and more in an area where we are probably convinced that it's not ignorance that's causing the problem. You know, whether we're dealing with bad habits or kids having unprotected sex and having unplanned pregnancies. Is it really ignorance, or is there something else? And the method is great at quickly exposing the individual reasons that these people have for making these decisions, and then we can learn from each other. And that's the exciting part of the tool and the app that we've created, is that we are encouraging people to tell us their stories. And there's a benefit of telling your story, both to yourself and to the ones that are reading from it, is that we often realize, you know, of course we are all special, but we're not unique. We are all experiencing very similar issues. And it's great to see that other people are also dealing with these dark clouds, and that we can learn from each other.
So you're saying that we have the same clouds and conflicts and whatever all over the globe?
Yes, I'm often asked, you know, do you see a difference if you come to Ukraine? You come to Ukraine, or you go to Colombia or South Africa or America. Are there differences, or do you see differences in different personality types? And of course there are subtle differences, but at the end of it, we're human, and to error is human. We make mistakes all the time, and we often make consequential mistakes that could have been avoided in terms of the key decisions in our life. You know, what to go and study, who to marry, what job to take, what do we eat, how do we create the future that we want for our family. These are really consequential decisions, and as you see the type of mistakes that people are making around the world, you find out that the fundamental causes of these mistakes are very similar. People do things that they probably know they shouldn't because of exaggerated frustrations and expectations. And people often don't do the things that they probably know they should because of exaggerated fears of loss and risk. So the method is just designed to help them expose those fears and frustrations so that we can challenge them and find better alternatives.
And actually I found out, I opened for myself one more unexpected advantage of your method when you were saying it can be used for students or pupils or anybody who cannot write essays or articles or books. Just tell a few words, because it was like a wow for myself.
Yeah, so anybody that's been a teacher or professor knows the reaction of students when you say to them, we're giving you homework, you have to write this essay. And they go, oh no, how many pages must it be? You know, what am I going to be writing about? You know, I love writing and I hate writing. The hate part is staring at that blank piece of paper and just finding some way of starting, right?
Right.
Once you start, then it's not that difficult to edit, etc. So one of the tests that we've done with the ProConCloud method is that we get people to just fill in a template of questions. So what's the problem that you're facing that's hanging over you like a dark cloud? Or what's the problem that society is facing that's hanging over all of us? And why is it important to us to solve this problem? What's the conflict that we faced in the past and dealing with it? What's the pros and cons of those? Who are being blamed at the moment for causing this problem? And what are the pros and cons for them to make the change that could solve the problem? And once I just fill in the template of questions, we can extract that knowledge into the form of an article with different paragraphs. And that is the job already 60-70% done. And then they can purely do the editing. And we've had amazing experiences of this. There's a great guy called Mike Round that's leading this research project. And he sent me an email the other day of a young black girl that he says has never written anything more than 2 pages. And just using the simple method, she submitted a most beautiful article that were almost 15 pages long. A very detailed, logical analysis of an important topic to her. So that's really encouraging. So it's just one of those unplanned applications of the method.
So it can be even a tool for any school, any university. It can be like the practical tool how to use, encourage students to write, etc. It's amazing. And just, I would like to come back for a while for Harmony Decision Maker app.
Yes.
So do we understand correctly that all Prometheus participants can fill in their clouds, make their analysis, and can share?
Yes. So when they get access to the app, whether they get access to our mobile app, which is for the iPhones and iPads or Android devices, or the web app, they get a 3-month trial. So that will allow them to complete the full analysis for free. Of course, if they want to continue, then there's a small subscription fee. But if they just want to view it, the viewer is always free. And the process, the app just takes them through these 5 steps. And one of the reasons why we created the app was to make it easy for people not just to follow the process, but to share their analysis with each other. That we can learn from each other. If you think about Facebook, we are sharing all the time what we are eating, what we are doing, right? And of course we are curious people, so it's nice to, if I have nothing to do, to see what you are doing and what you are eating. But imagine if we were sharing with each other the most difficult decisions that we are facing at the moment that's hanging over us like dark clouds, and the type of assumptions that we've had to challenge in resolving these conflicts. And the plans that we've built that can overcome all these excuses that we normally give as ourselves not to try. And the outcomes of those experiments. Have we actually started? Are we in progress? Have we completed it? Have we achieved the outcome? Or have we decided to put it on hold, to freeze? Those are all things that the app now makes possible, is that we can share very easily. And I should be able to do a search, go online and do a search and say, I'm having a problem with my mother-in-law, right? Who else in the world are having issues with their mother-in-law? And you can imagine probably quite a few, right? What can we learn from that? What was the bad assumptions that they've made that caused that conflict? Or who's having a difficult decision in terms of where to invest their money, or what to pay attention to, or how to deal with relationship issues, or maybe a difficult child that has become addicted? That's the final vision of the app, is that people can share with each other and learn from each other about the difficult decisions that they've made and the assumptions that they've had to challenge.
So now I understand that this is like a rather important part of the full analysis, because it's like an insight for me as well.
Absolutely.
Great. What will be your final recommendations to our participants at Prometheus? What you would like to tell to everybody, to all of us?
I think the starting point would be to really think about what are the type of decisions that you make on a daily basis, and what are the type of mistakes that you have realized that you not have only made but have repeated, right, that are consequential, whether it's at work or at home in your relationships. And why not try this method? It only takes a couple of hours to go through it. It just helps us to slow down our thinking a little bit, whether it's about analyzing a new decision that I'm making, whether to accept maybe a new job that was offered to me as an opportunity, or finally dealing with that disharmony I have with my partner or with a co-worker, or maybe a key decision I have to make in terms of where to invest money for my business. Is why not try it? It's very fast. There's guidelines for every step. There's lots of examples in our community library that you can learn from, and to share it with others and to get their feedback. That's the ultimate objective, is that we can start learning from each other to make better, faster decisions when it really matters.
Thank you so much for sharing all this important knowledge and insights for us and for Prometheus. Hope we will share all the cases we will done thanks to your method and thanks to Harmony Decision Maker app.
Yes, and then finally to remember, where's the bottleneck? The bottleneck is always at the top of the bottle. It's our limited attention. So, just be conscious of what and who you pay attention to. And don't just ask yourself, is what I'm paying attention to at the moment really helping me achieve these important goals? And even if it is helping a little bit, what am I giving up by paying attention to this thing or to this person that maybe could have helped me achieve more of the goals that are really important to me?
Thank you. It's a great pleasure and honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.